So the other day I was watching one of my favorite YouTubers, Savage Geese, and he had this video that inspired me to make this video. The video was called, what was it called? Hold on. The video was called Cars, Trucks, and Debt, Why It Never Ends. Basically, the premise of his video was to talk about the sort of ongoing automotive debt crisis that's going on, and it reminded me of this thing that happened a couple months ago when I was at a dealership. So I work in dealerships a lot in my day job. Basically, I'm like a consultant for various Ford dealers here in Texas. And one of the general managers I was talking to, I won't say who it was or what dealership it was, but one of the leaders of a dealership that I was in told me an interesting insight that made me a little bit worried. In fact, actually probably scared is a better word, about the future of the automotive industry. And it's very similar to what Savage Geese was talking about. Basically, he found out in a different job at a different dealership before he came to the position he's in now, he found out that people working underneath him were basically fraudulently falsifying income statements and credit applications. What was happening is people would come in and they'd be like a grocery store clerk, and they'd be paid hourly, maybe $9-10 an hour, and they'd be looking for a brand new car, which if you look at car prices these days, you probably can't afford if you're on a $9 or $10 an hour wage. But they would bump up the sort of prestige of that person's job and say, oh, they're a produce manager at a local grocery store chain, or the cashier would be the financial manager of a grocery store or something like that. And they would basically just fake that person's income. Somehow, I guess the banks that they were submitting these credit applications to didn't do their full due diligence and were actually giving out these loans based on fraudulent information. Now, as soon as he found out about this, he cut it off, fired everybody that was doing it, but he did say that this is far more common than anybody cares to admit. And that scares me because it sounds a lot like what was happening in the mid-2000s, where people were coming in looking for a loan because they were being advertised to, saying, hey, you should buy this, everybody's getting a new home, interest rates are super low, there's never been a better time to get a mortgage. And so people who didn't know much about personal finance or anything were coming into these banks saying, hey, I heard that you guys might be able to give me a mortgage even though I don't make that much money. And the bankers would say, absolutely, let me get all your information. Don't worry about telling me your income. Don't worry about telling me your position. I can almost guarantee you we can get you $200,000, no payment down or just very little down payment, and then off you go. Because what was happening is that banker was getting paid for originating the loan. They faced no consequences if this customer defaulted on it, so they were just trying to get as many loans originated as possible, because that bank would then bundle them up and sell them onto another bank. Then that bank would bundle up a bunch of other loans together and create a new diversified financial product that they could then chop up into little pieces again and sell onto other banks. And then it created more and more derivative products off of those original loans and led to a huge financial crisis. We kind of know what happened from there. If that sounds familiar, if it sounds similar to the story I just told you, it's because it sounds kind of like it. Do I think that the current car loan crisis is going to cause a similar financial meltdown the way that the housing crisis did? No. Basically because there's not nearly enough leverage in the market yet in order to cause that sort of massive financial meltdown that had sort of a global effect. However, it could easily contribute to a recession or something like that, and that's why it's concerning. But even more concerning is that it's going to hurt a lot of people who don't know any better. And there's going to be people out there who are being advertised to right now by dealerships and by car companies and by financial institutions saying, we can get you a really low payment, anybody can afford a loan, like come in. The worst culprits are obviously the used car lots that are like buy here, pay here. Those are just borderline scams at the end of the day. But even the more reputable brands feel a lot of pressure to increase sales constantly. There's so much financial pressure to keep growing. And that causes some sort of warped incentives that is sort of driving this need to get customers who probably shouldn't be buying new cars into the dealership, get them on a loan, and sell them a new car. That's not the end of it though. Savage Geese also talked about the social pressure that comes from influencers and YouTubers, admittedly, like me, that create this sort of feeling that, oh, I should be doing more. The beater that I have isn't enough. Why don't I have a car like these people I see on YouTube or the people I see on Instagram? And of course, that can escalate quite easily to people with incomes below $40,000 taking out loans on SUVs and trucks that cost $50,000, $60,000, which is just crazy. And Savage Geese pointed out that a lot of YouTubers in particular aren't being entirely upfront with how they can afford the cars that they have. And so part of what I want to do in this video is explain how I can afford these two cars. It's a $45,000 Ranger and then a used Cayman, which costs about $20,000 when I bought it. Just because I don't want to be part of the problem, you know? I don't want people watching my channel to feel any kind of pressure to go out and overextend themselves financially because they see the cars that I have and they think that they need to do the same thing. I don't want people watching my channel to feel any sort of social stigma about the car that they drive. I mean, driving a beater is great as long as you enjoy driving it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a cheap ass car. I'm starting to confuse myself with all this preamble, so let me just get into it. Basically, I have about $60,000 worth of cars, and I could not afford these if I had to pay for them myself. I've said before in a lot of my previous videos that my Ford that I have is always going to be a company car. So I work for Ford Motor Company. All of my videos about Fords are 100% completely biased because of the company that I work for, and that's because they give me this car that I need for work. It's not just a free perk, it is a nice perk, but I do actually need it for work because I have to drive around a lot to different dealerships and meetings all around the state of Texas. If I were to lose my job, God forbid, knock on wood, or if I were to get transferred back to headquarters in Detroit, then I wouldn't have this car anymore. I would have to go down to one car because I just wouldn't be able to afford a two-car lifestyle. Don't get me wrong, I get paid pretty well. I'm very, very lucky to be in the position that I am now. But even so, it wouldn't be financially smart for me to have a $45,000 Ranger if it wasn't part of the job description. Now, having said that, I did have to make a lot of sacrifices and work very hard to get to the point where I can have a job that has this perk. So even though I'm very lucky to have this position, it's not an accident by any means. All throughout college, I worked to make sure that my academics, my resume, my work experience, and my extracurriculars all kind of aligned, aiming at a position in the automotive industry that would allow me to drive interesting cars and spend a lot of time in cars. Because at the end of the day, that's what I love almost more than anything else. I figured I'm probably gonna spend all my free time messing around with cars anyways, so if there's a way to get somebody to pay me to do that, then all the better. Getting the job that I had wasn't the end of it either. I had to make a lot of sacrifices in other parts of my life. For example, I don't get to choose where I live. The company tells me, we need you to move here, and I move there. So now I live 1,000 miles away from my girlfriend, 1,000 miles away from my family and most of my loved ones. Yeah, it's not ideal, but it's one of the sacrifices that I've chosen to make in order to have some of the perks like getting a new car every 6 months that I get to drive, that the company pays for. Also, when I started, I was spending 3 to 4 nights a week in little hotels in rural Arkansas because that was the territory that I needed to cover for the company. And it got kind of lonely sometimes. That was tough, but at the end of the day, I stuck with it because I really, really liked the job that I was doing, and it allowed me to have a new car at no extra expense to myself, except for taxes. I do have to pay taxes because this is technically part of my income as far as the IRS is concerned. So I do pay taxes on the benefit of using it, but it is, other than that, effectively free. And that plays into my other car, my Porsche Cayman. So if it wasn't for this car, I would not have been able to buy this car, because the fact that I started my job with a daily driver that I didn't have to pay for myself, and all the insurance was covered and all the gas was covered, and I was living in hotels most of the time, so I didn't have to pay for air conditioning for most of the week, and I didn't have to pay for food most of the week because we have a food budget when we're out traveling. That effectively allowed me to have enough room in my personal budget in order to buy this car. Now, luckily, since then, I've gotten a few raises and bonuses that have allowed me to get to the point where even if I did have to get rid of this car, I could still afford to pay for this car on my own. But luckily, I don't, because this car kind of, in a way, pays for itself through my YouTube channel. When I first bought this car, I figured I'll give it maybe 6 months to a year to see if I can make good enough videos and get my viewing time up enough such that the ad revenue from the YouTube channel will cover the payments that I was making on the car. Luckily, thanks to you guys and a lot of good fortune, I got to the point where my YouTube revenue was high enough every month that it covered the entire cost of my monthly payments on this car. But if it did come to it and my YouTube revenue tanked and I got a new job, I would be perfectly willing to sell it and go back to like a Miata or something like that, where I wouldn't have to make any monthly payments on it, I just have to pay for insurance and gas and stuff like that. Basically, what I want you guys to take away from this is that there's a lot more story behind how I have these two cars. That's not just I took out a bunch of loans on them, or I come from like a rich family or something like that. But on the topic of YouTubers that come from wealthy backgrounds, I think this is really important to get across to viewers, that those supercar channels that do sort of the supercar vlogging, and they've got a new Ferrari every other month, and they bought their first Lamborghini when they were 20 years old and stuff like that, those people almost universally come from wealthy backgrounds. I promise you. I can think of a particular YouTuber that I know personally, and I'm not gonna say who they are, what channel it is, because I don't want to make this seem like I'm calling them out. Because in reality, this guy, when I met him, actually inspired me in part to start my own channel. So when I first met this guy, he was driving a Italian supercar, used, but an Italian supercar, and got to talking to him. He's like, yeah, I've got a YouTube channel, I'm a student, we went to the same college. But he was very vague about how the car itself actually got paid for. You never quite got a straight answer out of this guy about where the money was really coming from. And I don't blame him. I mean, it's kind of a sensitive topic. I'm not particularly comfortable talking about it here on this channel even, so I can totally understand where he's coming from. But I can assure you that this guy with about 70, 80,000 subscribers was not making enough ad revenue in order to afford the car that he had and the lifestyle that he was living. There just wasn't enough money, I don't care how high your CPM is. So I did a little Google search, and as it turns out, his dad was a CEO of a big company, and he comes from a very wealthy background, has a lot of connections to car dealers out in California and car dealers in Michigan, and just had a lot of sort of family advantages, let's put it that way, that I didn't have. Again, don't get me wrong, that's totally fine. More power to him. If I was in those circumstances, I would totally take advantage of them as well. After learning that, it made me actually feel a lot better about how my YouTube channel is going. Because I started my channel, I was like, oh my God, this guy is making so much money off of YouTube. And I started my channel and I was like a year into it, and I was making like $10 a month, you know, like peanuts. And I was like, man, like, am I really that bad? Like, what is going on? Why can't I get to that level? And then when I learned about his family circumstances, this guy that inspired me, I was like, oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense. He just has different circumstances coming from a different place than where I'm coming from. This YouTuber actually represents a huge subset of the sort of supercar vlogging lifestyle YouTube niche or whatever. There's a lot of people out there that are driving extremely expensive cars that might want to make you think that the reason they can afford it is because they're just killing it on YouTube and on social media. But I can almost guarantee you that in every single one of those cases, they come from a background where either their parents are rich or they got rich from a separate enterprise. They were a previous business owner, or they got in at the ground level at a startup, or somebody else invested in their channel or something like that, because there's just not that much money in YouTube unless you're at like the very, very top, like the 1% of the 1% of YouTube channels. And sure, some of those channels did come from nothing. Some of those channels are indeed what they seem. One YouTuber that I would like to give a shout out to, just because this could not be interpreted as calling him out, is the Stradman. He has a Lamborghini and I think an Audi R8, and he's owned a couple of really cool cars, but I really like the fact that he's really upfront with the journey that got him there.
A couple years ago, I picked 6 random numbers and won $300 million in Mega Millions. No, I didn't win the lottery, guys. I didn't win the lottery, okay? And if I did, I wouldn't be driving a Lamborghini Gallardo.
And there's other YouTube channels like him that if you go back to their early videos, or if you go to their videos where they talk about their history, they will lay out exactly how they got to where they are now. So that's pretty much everything I have to say on this topic. I really highly recommend that you go check out Savage Geese's video on this topic that this video is kind of a response to, because it is really, really good and makes a lot of points that I didn't cover in my video. The motto of this channel is for car happy people, so if you're happy with your car, then just keep on being happy and don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Although you should keep watching car YouTube channels, because watching car YouTube channels is very good and it doesn't cost you anything except like 10-15 minutes of your time. So, and hit a like button. I really appreciate you guys staying with me in this, again, long rambling video. If you stayed with me to the end, wow. I don't know if I could listen to myself do this, although I have to because I have to go back and edit this video. Anyways, I'm just rambling on now. So see you guys in the next one. Take care. Late stage capitalism dictates that I follow the YouTube algorithm, which means that I'm gonna have to come up with some sort of Game of Thrones related title. So if there's a Game of Thrones related title on this video, that's why. Just trying to play the game, you know?